Patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel, so said Dr. Samuel Johnson, the great 18th century man of letters. And in this case, the patriotism is of those who support the BBC against Donald Trump and say that it is unpatriotic to support Donald Trump in his actions against the BBC. The reason you know this is nonsense is that the people who are coming to the aid of the BBC on this point are people who never normally want to wrap themselves in the flag. Indeed, the very people who are normally extremely sniffy about those who do admire, love, and want to display either the Union Jack or the St. George's Cross. But now they want to raise the patriotic standard, not because they really love their country, but because they don't like Donald Trump. And it completely misunderstands what is going on and why what the BBC has done is wrong, and why the BBC deserves consequences for what it has done. First of all, let us look at the licence fee question. Is it wrong that licence fee money should go to somebody who sues for libel? Let's for the moment assume that it's not Donald Trump, it's somebody else, that the BBC, in its long history, has inevitably libelled people. And for that, it has had to pay out money. And that money comes from the licence fee. It is part of the cost of doing business. And in this instance, I would actually defend the BBC and other broadcasters and media outlets, because sometimes you have to take a risk. Sometimes you think that there is a case to be answered, that somebody has done something wrong, and that you need to take the risk of a libel action, that you are 90% of the way there. You have most of the information that you want, and you have to take that risk, and sometimes it will go the wrong way. And that must be right, because we know that some very undesirable people have used the libel laws in this country to keep information on them secret. Think of Robert Maxwell, think of Mohammed Fayed, people who have very aggressively used courts, the libel system, to keep broadcasters quiet. Now, the BBC hasn't always been on the right side of this. It hasn't always taken enough risk, but it does have to take that risk. It has sometimes to do things that could be a libel. And it has, other than BBC commercial arm, no primary source of income other than the licence fee. And indeed, it used only to have the licence fee in its 100-year history. So it is reasonable for licence fee money to be used to pay for legal actions. It's not a segregated fund. It's not a fund that is only available for programme making, nor has it ever been only available for programme making. It is there for the general costs of running a business, and businesses take the risk of facing lawsuits. They all do. Every business does. And actually any business that ever goes anywhere near America faces even greater risks than others. So the first point is that the licence fee is not this special fund. I would, however, add as an aside that I think the licence fee should be abolished. I think it is completely unjustifiable. But let's hold that thought and come back to it, because it may be quite interesting. The next thing is, should a foreign leader sue the BBC? Well, in normal circumstances, it's not going to be very successful. There is going to be a very wide margin of what you can say about our own public figures, let alone about foreign public figures. You can say you don't like them, you can say you think they govern badly, you can say that you think their administrations are not entirely honest. All those sorts of things are the normal flotsam and jetsam of political life. That is fair. You can call them sleazy, whatever you like. What we can't do is make up what they've actually said, to give the impression that they have said something completely different. That's not libel. It's actually fraud. And it would be quite wrong, in my view, to say that the BBC can commit fraud without any consequences, that it can get away scot-free because the person it's committed fraud against is a foreign leader. That simply seems to me to be mistaken. And then there's the idea that broadly what is done by the state should be immune from legal recourse, that the BBC, because it's state-owned, should be above and beyond that. But I think there are two responses to that. The first is that yes, the BBC is state-owned, but it's always tried to pretend that it's independent. It hasn't always been true, but it's always wanted to say it is independent, and this has been very important for things like the World Service, where the reputation of the BBC has been everything, and it needed to show that it was admittedly a state-owned, but not a state-run broadcaster, that it was independent of the state, and its programmes did not reflect the government's policy, they reflected the BBC and were made supposedly impartially. Now, it may have failed on this, but it is an important part of its reputation, particularly when broadcasting to totalitarian regimes. That's the first point on this. The second point is that a fundamental principle of the English and subsequently the British Constitution is that the king is not above the law, that the law is above the king. The king is under the law, unlike in France where the king was the law. And that means that recourse may always be had against the decisions of the king's agents in the king's courts. The BBC must therefore be under the law if it has broken it. And to say there is some state exemption would be quite wrong and indeed improper. And I'd go further than that, I would say unconstitutional, would undermine a basic tenet of our Constitution that has served us so well. And you may go on to say, but then taxpayers' money gets used. And I'd get back to the point I made on licence fee. But in general, taxpayers' money is used to pay compensation when the government fails, when the government breaks the law, or sometimes even fails to stop other people from breaking the law. So the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board pays out to people who've been injured because the state wasn't able to uphold the law properly. The government pays out compensation when the NHS makes mistakes. All of this comes from taxpayers' money. Taxpayers routinely compensate individuals who the state has treated badly. So if the BBC is viewed as an arm of the state, not only is it not exempt from paying compensation, it actually is routine for the state to pay compensation. But I want to come back to that issue about the licence fee, because there is hostility to the licence fee being used to compensate Donald Trump. But the blame for that should not be placed on Donald Trump, but on the BBC for committing a fraud against him. And that is where we can get the issue about whether the licence fee is justified. Because when you say, I don't want my licence fee money to go to Donald Trump, what you're really saying is not that you mind Donald Trump asking for it, but you mind the BBC having made the mistake in the first place that allows him to ask for it. And if the BBC cannot be trusted with licence fee payers' money because it ends up paying it to foreign leaders, because it ends up committing fraud and making programmes that are untruthful, then the whole basis for the licence fee begins to be weakened. It should not be able to charge a tax on watching live television. It happens, I don't mind people paying a licence fee to watch the iPlayer because that could perfectly reasonably be commercialised to a subscription service. It's what it de facto already is. The idea you have to pay a fee to watch GB News or ITV or heaven forfend Channel 4 seems to me to be absolutely outrageous, outdated and outmoded, and that Donald Trump is helping to prove this. So that's why I think the BBC, regardless of where the money is coming from, should settle as quickly as possible. We should criticise the BBC for the failures that have led to this, and it reinforces the argument that the licence fee is yesterday's news. To get a better BBC, a commercial BBC, a BBC that works, is patriotic. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. To say the law should not be applied because you want to safeguard the dishonesty of the BBC is truly the last refuge of a scoundrel. As always, thank you very much for watching.